Hello everyone, Nassim here with Photography Life. Today I want to talk about a very important topic, and that's image management. Specifically, I want to talk about the image management capabilities of Lightroom. Now, the reason why I said it's important is because if you properly organize your images in your computer, you will not only be able to quickly find photos when you need them, but you will also be able to streamline and standardize your workflow process, which is important for consistency reasons. So, a lot of us, especially new to photography, will end up storing images everywhere. We'll have them on our desktops and multiple folders across different drives and perhaps even different computers. Well, it's not that bad when you have a very small number of images, but what happens when you have thousands of images or maybe even tens of thousands of images? That's where folder structure and organization becomes extremely important. So before I dive into Lightroom's built-in image management capabilities, let me first talk about the folder structure organization that I have at the operating system level. So what I'll typically do is I'll have under my root drive, I'll have one folder called Photos. I'll make sure that this folder contains all of my photos. I will not have another folder elsewhere. Within that folder, I'll have subfolders organized by year. So in this case, I've got 2011, 12, and 13. Within each year, I'll have a separate folder structure organized by event name. So in this case, it's photo shoot 1, 2, and 3. And then if I need to separate it even more, let's say by day, I could have that. Most of the time, though, I don't bother with doing this. So it's a very simplistic approach to file management, but it works out great because first of all, I know that all the images are under photos. So if I'm backing up my images, all I have to do is back up this one folder. The second thing is organizing by year allows me to grow in the future. So if I have a lot of images and I don't want to end up with too many images in one Lightroom catalog, which will slow the catalog down, I can actually create a separate catalog by year. So I can have one catalog for 2011, one for 2012, and one for 2013. And eventually, if I run out of space, let's say I shoot a lot of raw images, what I could do then is I could move the years that I no longer need and archive them into a separate drive, and then at the same time do the same thing for my Lightroom catalogs for 2011-12. It's a very nice and simplistic approach in my opinion, and it's been working out great for me for the last 5-6 years. So how do you take this sort of structure and apply it to Lightroom? I know that a lot of people use Lightroom as an image editor and they don't bother doing any image organization, which I believe is a wrong thing to do. Lightroom is a very powerful tool, not just for image editing but also for organization. So in this case, what we want to do is we want to take this one folder called Mess, which I took some sample images and I posted and I just copied them here. Looks like I've got a bunch of DNG files that my operating system can't recognize, and then also some images from the mountains, some Disneyland images. So the idea is imagine that this is your messy folder structure, that you have maybe similar folders with a lot of images and you just want to organize that in a logical manner. So how do we do that? How do we take this one folder or multiple folders with a lot of images and organize it in a very nice kind of way like this? Well, there's a very easy way to do it in Lightroom. The first thing we need to do is we need to import the images. So we go into File and Import Photos and Video, and as you can see, this is a brand new catalog. So I'm going to start clean. And instead of doing copies, DNG or move or copy, I'm simply going to add the images. So I'm going to click on this folder Mess. And if you have multiple folders that you need to go through, you can import several times into Lightroom. Now, when all the images are selected, as you can see, and my DNG files are being read, so I can see there's a bunch of images from Taekwondo tournaments and other events. So I'm going to go ahead and click import and not worry about other settings. Now what's happening now is Lightroom is simply reading the metadata attached to each file. It's simply going through every file and taking that EXIF information with aperture, lens, and camera information and adding that to the database. It did not do anything as far as file organization yet. So all it's doing is taking this one folder and reading information from each file and adding that to the database. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and delete the sample photos folder that I created earlier. And what we want to do now is we want to create a brand new structure. So the way we start here is, you can see I've got a folder called mess, and instead of creating folders underneath, I want to right click here and say show parent folder. When I do that, as you can see, my parent folder E comes up. Now what I'm going to do is recreate that same folder structure that I talked about earlier. So we'll do a create folder inside E, and I call it photos. I want to make sure that include select photos is unchecked. Now we need to go by year, but how do I find images by year? If I go back to the root folder and I click on metadata, this is a very powerful filter. This allows me to filter by different cameras, lenses, and if I want to do things like ISO or map GPS information if there's available, or let's say camera serial number, I can do that all here. Well, in this case, the first column is date, and that's a very useful column because it allows me to see which years I need to create. So in this case, I've got 2,000 photos from 2008, 10, 11, 13. So let's go ahead and create that same structure. I'm going to right click on photos and create folder inside photos. So one for 2008. Then if I expand this, I can see that got there 2010. Then two more, 2011, and lastly 2013. So now when you do that, this part actually represents your real operating system. If I go back and look at remember I deleted that photos folder? Well, it's back there again. As you can see, mess, photos are both there. If I go there, I can see that 2008, 10, 11, 13 are listed underneath. The nice thing about Lightroom is that it actually allows you to see child folders like this. Whereas in the operating system, you might not be able to see that in the same manner. So now what we need to do is we need to organize. Remember in the previous structure, I wanted to have images organized in different folders by event. So in this case, I'm going to look at just 2008 images, and as you can see, I only have one event, and this was taken in a wildlife sanctuary near Denver. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click 2008, and as you can see, I select all the images that I want and create a folder inside 2008 and name it wildlife sanctuary. So if I click this include selected photos, since I selected these photos, it will take all of them and move it physically from the mess folder into a subfolder under 2008. So I'm going to go ahead and click create, and as you can see, I've got wildlife sanctuary now with 10 photos underneath. If I go to the operating system level, there it is, wildlife sanctuary and 10 images. Great, now we can move on to 2010. So under 2010 now, we want to create a similar folder structure. I know that all of these were taken in Disneyland, California with my kids. We went there in 2010, so I'm going to right click here, create folder, and call it Disneyland trip. And I will once again include selected photos, create. Now let's go to 2011, that's next. And looks like I have some images from the San Juan Mountains, and we'll do the same thing here for 2011. Create folder, San Juan Mountain trip, and include the selected photos. So now, obviously, you might have a lot more different images with different themes. So, but as you can see, I have my folder structure similar to what I've done before. Disneyland trip under 2010, 2011, just that. So now 2013 has the largest number of pictures, and I did this specifically so I have multiple events here. So now all of these are obviously Taekwondo from a Taekwondo tournament, and it ends right here. So I can select a group of photos. Now, if you don't know how to select a group of photos, just hold on to the Shift button, select one image, and then select the last image, which will select everything. So now that everything is selected, once again, all I have to do, right click, create folder, and call it Taekwondo Tournament, and we will include the selected photos. Go ahead and click create. Now it physically moved those images under 2013, and if I go there now, the only thing I see there is the Taekwondo Tournament. Alright, so we're going to go back to the mess, and we have to now sort through the rest of the images. So this was from a soccer game, I remember that. And took the kids, that's our little baby girl Jasmine, she's 10 months old now. So we'll go ahead and create a new folder here, and I'm not going to bother with a separate folder name for soccer game. I typically put all home pics under a folder called home pics. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, once I do that, those images are gone. Now I have a little bit more to deal with, and from the same year. Now, one thing that you absolutely need to make sure, actually, before you start any sort of organization, is you need to go to View and make sure that everything is sorted by capture time in ascending or descending order, whichever one you prefer. I prefer ascending order. That way the earlier pictures show up first and the later pictures show up later. So capture time, absolutely make sure that you have that selected. That way all the images are actually sorted by the time they were captured. Now I know these were taken in separate trip to San Francisco. I can go back to metadata and I can actually click on this field and I can see that there are images from February, March, April, and May, 4 different months. If I go to February, that's my first trip to San Francisco. If I go to March, I can see that there's some other pictures. Actually, you know what? These were taken at the end of February. If I look at the information here, you can see that this is February 28th. So these actually continue from that same trip. And then I have some images from April. This was obviously a separate trip. And then some images from May. So, all right, how do we know? Now go back to 2013 and we need to reorganize this. But as you can see, these images are actually kind of colliding. So I have some images and then I know these were actually taken from San Francisco as well. And then there's these 3 images that fall in between. Well, what happened was my wife shot some images with the EM5, which I left at home while I was shooting with the D30-200 in San Francisco. She shot with the EM5 at home at the same time frame. So I know that I have to separate those out. Now I'm going to select a group of photos here, and I'm going to create a new folder and call it San Francisco trip. And I'm going to include those selected photos and move those. And once the images are moved, I have these home pics that I have to move to the home, but I know there's also separation here. So what I'm going to do, if I select a group of images, I can actually hold the control button and select more images. That way you can see I can skip a bunch of images. So again, you can group select by holding the shift button. Now if I do the shift button, it will select all these images as well, which I don't want. But I can group select these 3 by holding the shift button. Then I can hold the control button by itself and click on each individual image. I know that all of these were taken at home, so I am going to manually move them to home pics. As soon as we do that, all the images are gone. Now I know that these were also from a San Francisco trip, so I am going to move them manually into San Francisco trip. Now when I do that, as you can see, there's a new prompt that says moving files on disk. This will cause the corresponding files to be moved. Sure, go ahead. And when you do that, it will physically move the files. Now, lastly, these were actually taken in May. This was a separate trip that I had to Orlando. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move these into a separate folder and call it Orlando trip. All right, now that everything is gone and everything is organized, as you can see, my mess folder now contains 0 images. We can actually get rid of it. When I do that, if I go back to my folder structure, I can see there is only one folder called photos. And then underneath I have 2008, 10, 11, 13. If I go into those, I see home pics, Orlando, San Francisco, and take on a tournament. One thing that we haven't done though, I mean, now that we have the structure in place and it's neatly organized, we have still that same naming convention for each file. More mess, and if I go to Taekwondo, it's still more mess. So what I typically like to do is once I move those files, I like to go through each individual folder. And this is a one-time kind of a deal. I select all the images. If you press F2, it will allow you to rename the photos. And you can select, I believe there's a custom name that you can actually choose any of these. I believe the default was file name sequence, but you can really call it whatever you want. In this case, I created my own template, which We'll cover this in a separate tutorial, but my file naming is, I'll go year, month, day, dash, name of the event, dash, sequence of the file. So in this case, if I, under custom text, type in wildlife sanctuary, I will end up, as you can see, the file name is actually changing as I'm typing in here, which is really nice. Now I've got the start number, and that's the first start. The first name of the file will start with 001. So I'm going to go click OK. And as you can see, it just renamed all the files. Now if I go back to the file structure and I look at 2008, I can see that files now have the date, the name, and the file number. And this is my preferred way to do it. People do it differently. I like this approach, but I would do the same thing for all these others, so I'm not going to bother with everything, but let's just do the Taekwondo one real quick. Taekwondo tournament, and click OK. Now if I go back and look at the Taekwondo tournament, I can see that the files have been named properly. So this is a neat way to organize files in Lightroom, and keep in mind that you can actually utilize this very powerful metadata filter, which allows you to go through and look at even individual dates if you want to, or even look by different camera types or lenses or pretty much any other information that is sortable in Lightroom. So this is the very basic part of image management. You can do a lot more other things. You can sort images differently. You can go through and organize your photos and videos even in Lightroom. I prefer to only use Lightroom for photos, but lately I've been adding some videos as well. So if you want to keep those in a separate place, you can do that. You can have one folder for photos, you can have one folder for videos separately, or perhaps you can just add photos and videos into the same folders. Whichever way you prefer really works great. So once you do that, it's a great way to organize images. And the nice thing is, if I go through my export settings now, if I want to, let's say, export this one image, if I go to File and Export, the nice thing is I can simply call, and I can say, okay, I'm going to export this into a folder called Lightroom Export, and I'm not going to rename the files. So instead of clicking rename and going through different same task that I've done earlier, I can just uncheck this and it will name it the same way that it's named. In this case, obviously I didn't change the name of the file, so it's still more mess, but let's just go to one of these Taekwondo ones where I exported. If I go to File and Export again, and as you can see, the file name, the original file name, is retained, and I can do everything else that I typically do. You know, file settings, JPEG, 90% quality, or maybe set it to a lower value if I need a higher compression rate, sharpening, and everything else that I typically do. So that's a basic tutorial on image management, and if you have any questions, please let me know. But please do not just use Lightroom for editing images, because Lightroom is way more than that. You can do a lot of cool things with it. This is just a very simple way to organize images. You can actually do a lot of other things like creating collections and then creating keywords. As you can see, when I import images, I actually do add keywords to certain images, or to actually most of the images. I will also do rankings of images. There's a lot of things you can do, and you can sort through images very quickly. You could do sort through just flagged images like that. So don't just use Lightroom for purely image editing. It's way more than that. It's also a very powerful image management tool, as you can see. And if I go ahead and close out of Lightroom, now what I can do, I know that everything has been sorted out. Now when I back up everything, all I have to worry about is one folder, photos. Alright, well, if you have any questions, please let me know, and I hope you found this tutorial useful. Bye.